Hello and welcome to Day Home Divas. I'm Joanne.
I'm Cash.
I'm Sophia.
In this episode, we welcome back Heather and Kari.
Thanks. Thank you.
There seems to be a lot of negativity towards agencies as of late. Is any of this misguided?
I think that maybe not misguided as much as obviously the agencies that are not acting always in the best interest, those educators are going to be the most vocal
Right.
about, and as they should be. As they should be.
Yeah.
And so I think that it becomes one of those things where even though I don't want them to feel like they are but maybe the minority of people are with bad agencies or agencies that aren't supporting them the way they should, but they're going to be the loudest and they should be the loudest because they deserve to be. But you're not going to hear from our 30 educators. They're just happily going about their day
Right.
and doing their thing. And to be honest, in Medicine Hat in general, we have 4 agencies in Medicine Hat. We all operate a little bit differently, but I would say we are all good agencies. Like
Yeah.
everybody is, there's not a lot of like switching between agencies, and when it is, it's usually like it's like policy related things. Maybe it's not, nobody's angry, nobody's mad usually, and so I would say all four. And you don't see a lot of Medicine Hat educators struggling or having a hard time with their agencies. And
Right.
so I think that some areas are a lot quieter because they're doing their thing. The
Yeah.
policies are rolling out, things are fine. So I don't think it's misplaced necessarily, but it's just maybe not as big as it can appear.
Well, and also I think
Right.
right now it's chaos out there. Like it is
Yeah.
sheer chaos. And there's a lot of misinformation floating around. And a lot of the misinformation that's floating around is things that people should be angry about, but it's not true. So I think they're definitely, like Carrie's saying, yes, there's some that is rightfully deserved, but there is some where it's a miscommunication or, we just need a little more communication and it wouldn't even be a problem.
I do think
Yeah.
it's important to note, again, I don't want to feel like I'm bashing that agencies have, when a new agency does open, there's no guidance from anybody. Their licensing does not care what your business practices are or have any advice to you for your business practices. I know that there's guidance you can hire now. Like I know Brad does it, a couple different places that offer some consulting that help. But if you didn't hire a consultant or you can't because you're just trying to start an agency, there's very little support for what the norm is, what the business practices are. And it used to be kind of a closed off group as well. Other agencies weren't always willing to share. That's gotten a lot better, I would say, especially like the government has driven us together as we've had to rebel against them. No. So, but it is when you first open an agency, we did a lot of things really what the other 3 agencies in town would have probably said are weird. Like, why would you do it that way? But we didn't know any better.
To be fair, I
Right.
did reach out to them because we were the first new agency in like 20 years in Medicine Hat. So
Yeah.
I reached out to all of them multiple times, being like, hey, how do you guys do this? And they didn't answer. So we just came up with
Our own plans.
Right.
Now we're just not used to it. We just do what we want all the time. But like it benefited us in the long run.
Yeah.
We are also seeing cases where it's to a new agency's detriment that there isn't any support for them.
They just don't know
Right.
what the norms are.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear this side of, like as private providers, we always have felt that it's us against the agency run providers and then providers against agencies. It's interesting to hear that agencies have some similar struggles with, others not being willing to share their information and to help guide and support. It's interesting to hear that.
We've heard that a lot. We have some educators who came from private and they're like, I don't know why I didn't do it sooner. This is not at all what I thought it was. Right. So I don't know if
Yeah.
that is something that was more common like in the past that it was more contentious that way, but all the ones we've had, they're like, oh my gosh, this is great.
This is a lot easier than I thought it would be. The big one is I think that a lot of them saw more as an employee-employer relationship and thought we were going to come be their bosses.
I see that a lot.
Right. And that's not at all what our practices are.
Yeah. What are some things that agencies can do to protect the rights of the providers that work for them? Like what do you guys have the ability to do to protect your providers?
So being part of Africa is a good place to start. If your agency is not part of Africa, tell them. go be part of AFCA. Because at the very least, AFCA does get quarterly leadership meetings where they are meeting with the top people in the department in order to communicate what's happening. What they do with that information, who knows? But at least that voice, that channel remains open to
Right.
have those discussions. So I think that that's a big one.
Yeah, and I think that all goes back to that advocacy piece, right? Is
Yeah.
ideally all agencies are willing to go to battle for their educators. I mean, without them, there is no agency, right? So that
Yeah,
should be your top priority, right? Is making sure that they are
exactly.
secure and comfortable and that this can be a successful business venture for them.
So, and I think also like keeping educators updated on what you are doing behind the scenes. So I posted in we have a group obviously that has just our educators in it. I posted the questions I sent in and the questions I was waiting for answers for. And as those answers come in, we start including that in the post. I mean, I've had to write back now multiple times on our questions and say, I need you to answer me with a yes or a no. Because the government sends the most absurd replies to my questions. And departments that
Right.
have like the child care branch answered a question that was very clearly for the licensing branch, and then the licensing branch is like, no, 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 don't listen, that wasn't right. And I'm like, seriously, you guys, like. And so, and I've had to write back and say, thank you for your reply, but I need a yes or a no so that
Yeah,
we know how to proceed, right? And so we keep our educators updated of, where we're at in that advocacy process. And, when all this stuff came out, one of the first things we did was call an in-person meeting for anybody who could attend, where we could provide the information, share what it meant for them and their changes in their programs, and then gather any concerns that they had. The ones we could answer, we answered. The ones we couldn't, we started working on getting the answers for. We have our regular email addresses, then we each have our own personal email addresses, and we just start firing them off. And if I don't get answers, I work my way all the way up the chain until I get to the minister. And I just keep going. And usually somewhere in the middle, like a middle type person will fire it back to somebody else and be like, can you answer her on this or whatever it might be? And so we keep on it, and we'll get on the phone if we have to, but nobody ever answers. So the phone usually isn't our best bet. But
yeah,
you find people in the government who respond a little faster, and then we save their email addresses, and they're the ones we go to first. So I think that's a big one too. It's just agencies remaining transparent with what they're doing.
Yeah. You know what? I
yeah.
think we also need to take half a second to give credit to Brady, who owns the
Oh
agency
yeah.
that we work for. She is like, go get them. Like she loves to watch us go out for blood.
Yeah.
There are some agencies where consultants and agency coordinators have much more of a like strict role. Your role is payroll, your
Yes.
role is visiting.
Right.
So for us, we were lucky that right from the very top, values us.
And we're salaried, which gives us a lot of freedom on our time too. So, we
Yeah,
can be available to educators in the evenings, weekends, whenever they might need us. And so, yeah.
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 Just that
That,
willingness.
that,
I mean, even this, right? Like I saw your post about your podcasting. You had spoken to educators and you had spoken to families, and being willing to connect,
Yeah.
make these connections in the community as a whole and share information. That's what this should be. And I don't know
yeah,
why it isn't, because it's fun.
I know. I'm always
yeah,
happy to talk about what work we're doing and, how we're supporting educators. And we do a lot of it in hope that other agencies see that and are like, okay,
yeah.
well, this is how we can function. And I mean, it's been a successful, I'm not going to say that it's never had its hiccups. We've definitely lost educators that have been like, you are not the agency for me. That's okay. That's okay. That's
Yeah,
why we have multiple choices in medicine. Like it,
yeah.
and so there's definitely people who the way that we do things, it's not doesn't work for them. And
Right.
that's okay too. But I think as long as it's okay for agencies to be different, as long as they're still high quality.
Yeah. It's nice to see too that you guys, your agency seems to be quite transparent and this is exactly what we're doing. This is the response we're getting. That's got to give providers some comfort, knowing that you guys are willing to go to bat for them and not stop until you get those answers that they need.
So we sometimes joke with our educators, we have a good section of them that I don't want to say don't care, but would never even bother to ask us about any of it because they know we're already working on it. Like
Yeah,
it doesn't, they just don't even, they're like, you got this part, I'm gonna take care of kids.
Yeah,
We built that trust and that relationship that they know that when these numbers came out and it showed that the parents were going to be paying a whole bunch more and parents are going to be upset, that we're getting on that we are getting on that right away. We're going to try and figure out ways to make it work. We're, trying to help some educators with some discounts if they want to, for some sibling pairs to keep them, even if they're discounts that are only for a couple months, just to help them gradually
right.
increase to that higher bill, things like that. So they know that we're coming in the background to support
Yeah,
them, and so they just happily are doing their thing. Yeah, yeah,
And so they should, right?
yeah. Let's worry about
yeah.
it.
They don't need to be worrying about all this on top of it. Like,
Yeah.
geez.
Yeah, I definitely don't think it's the norm, though. I think you guys kind of go above and beyond, and you stand out as an agency from hearing other providers talk about how their agencies are treating them. It definitely seems like you guys are above the standards for what agencies provide for their providers.
Yeah, and that's nice to hear. But also, like I said, we hear from these educators all the time, and they're feeling isolated and they're feeling confused and and that just like literally breaks my heart that there are women, especially women, out there doing this day in and day out, and they feel so alone. Like that, it's just heartbreaking.
Yeah, honestly, I had no idea that providers within agencies ever felt that way, like alone, and like the new fees and the new programs that's coming out has totally opened my eyes because a lot of the things they're complaining about, not having the support and stuff. As a private provider, I sit back and I'm say that's the whole point of being with an agency is for all that support, is for them to be helping you when you need it and you're not getting it. And so as a private provider, my first response is, well, go private. Why would you stay with an agency that's not doing the benefits of what an agency is for? And now learning that that's not maybe all agencies. That's just some are bad. It's definitely opened my eyes quite a bit.
Well, you don't know what you don't know, right? So if you are with an agency for the first time, you might think that that's just how agencies go, right?
And
Yeah,
I'm thinking that the South in general might be, because Lethbridge has good agencies too, that are like, so maybe the South in general we're a little bit separated from and just don't have the same face the same, but we definitely see it, outside.
Years with the way that they were doing like contracts and things like that, there were new agencies opening up in the big cities. We had referred to them for a while as pop-up agencies who were not getting funding like other agencies were.
Right, that was another
yeah,
problem.
They were the ones who are like charging deposits and the ones who are keeping baby bonuses or infant incentives or whatever because they couldn't stay afloat and if they didn't.
right.
And
The government was like,
so
sure,
again,
here's your
that
license.
comes from the top down, right? Of they let them
Yeah,
open and then they just threw them out to sea with no support either. So, it's you put on your own oxygen mask first. You have to support the agency so you
right.
can support educators.
Yeah,
Yeah, they really mucked this whole thing up.
What they did too is they gave, so when spot spaces became available, that they were going to give out more day home spaces, educator spaces, they allowed new agencies to open and gave them all of those day home spaces instead of giving them to the established agencies that already had a
right.
great reputation, that already had been
Yeah,
functioning for years and years and years. The government, I understand wanting to allow others, but then give that new agency 5 and see how they do. And give the
yeah,
other 20 to that established agency that is operating well and doing well, right? Like that didn't make
yeah,
any sense either. So then there was like a flood of upset and concern. I'd be very interested if anybody could ever get the stats or create a poll around that. Those who are not feeling supported by their agencies, if it's an agency that's been around for 5 years or one that's been around for 15 years. And I'd be interested to
right.
see where most of them are falling.
Keeping in mind that a lot of the older agencies have been through accreditation.
Right. Yes, that's true too. That's a great point.
We have things in place from accreditation that have always been how we've done it because we needed to have that accreditation for top up because we think they're good things to do.
Yeah,
But it was mandated in documents. These are the things we're doing to go above and beyond. These new agencies haven't had to do
that's
that.
true too. Yeah, that's really true.
Right. So do you think the new flat fee is actually helping the parents that need the financial help, or is it the higher income families that are going to be benefiting the most?
For our region, the higher income families are benefiting the most. again, nobody is saying childcare should have been free, but it's
Right.
requiring that it's taking that leap from $0 to 326, 25. That's the problem. So
Carrie and I were pretty active on a post when the government first released. We were on a lot. And the government actually replied to one comment saying, we anticipated that about half of Alberta families who utilize licensed childcare will be seeing an increase, and the other 50% will be seeing a decrease. So they knew that half of Albertan families were going to be seeing an increase, and they knew that it was going to be the lowest income families who saw that.
Right.
And they were happy
I
to
mean,
push
it's
that
common
on.
sense,
yeah,
right?
and that's why we can advocate all we want, but I don't see that changing because
Yeah.
that's why they didn't tell us ahead of time because they knew we'd fight
Right.
it.
In none of my meetings was subsidy being removed ever
They
presented.
kept that so hush hush.
Right.
And we did like in-person meetings with them, and they made it seem like the government wants to fund you for core costs, they were calling it. Their whole point of being there was to gather what we thought core costs should be. And unanimously at our table, and I think in the whole, we were like, food needs to be a core cost. Children deserve proper nutrition. This might be the only time in their day that they get a hot meal. Food has
Right.
to be a core cost. And they turn around and they take away subsidy, and now apparently food can be an enhanced service. And we are just so confused about that
Yeah.
even happens, right? And then you throw in there too the shift from being part of the Children's Service Ministry to Jobs, Economy, and Trade. We do not belong with JET. That is
No.
not where we belong at all. And I think what we're
Right.
seeing is a huge, huge result of that, because like opening up all those daycares and childcares, it's because he wants to create jobs.
Again, that was
Yeah.
in our opinion was another association that pushed and pushed and pushed for that, and they were loud enough that they got it.
Yeah.
It was not the rest of us that wanted that. I mean,
Right.
we didn't want that. One association made that their priority, and they pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed, and the government finally was like, okay, let's do it. But that is no, it was never posed to us as a sector. What do you guys
Yeah.
think, or what do we think about changing ministries, right? It was, and so we don't want, none of us wanted that except for this one group of owners. And
Yeah.
so it for me, it's been terrible.
Yeah. Okay, so do you think the majority of providers are benefiting from the new program?
I think, like we had said before, I think it's 50-50 for educators too, depending on which region you live in.
Yeah.
I think
Right.
either parents benefit or educators benefit, but in no region do I think both are benefiting.
So I can
For
tell you
sure.
a few benefits I see for our region. I do appreciate that the government is continuing to base this on registered hours opposed to actual hours attended. We have a lot of homes that they only have full-time spots. That's all there is to it. You don't have to attend
Yeah.
full-time, but you're going to pay for a full-time spot. So that allows them to keep that, which allows for some income consistency. They don't have to drop down
Right.
to part-time the month that the children fall under. So I think like some of those things that are in place are supportive of the educators. And again, in our region, our ladies are making a bit more.
Right.
So for them, as long as they can balance that with keeping their families enrolled,
Right.
I think I'd rather have our problem than the North's problem.
Right.
But
What are
there
your
still
thoughts?
is risk to educators, right?
Yes.
Risks that
Yeah.
families, we already have terminations for April 1st because the fees are going up and they just can't do it, right?
So they're
So
going to
they're
grandmas,
risking-
they're going somewhere.
But they also are risking losing enrollments, which means they make less, right?
This is
Like,
where we're trying to use some
Right.
of those discounts strategically so that educators can offer a bit of a discount, but still be making. And I think it's only going to be for a year because in a year
Right.
the fees are going to drop again. And in theory, the fees are going to drop and their wages will go up, right? Because in theory, each year when we sign this contract for April 1st, there will be something built in for inflation.
Right.
So
in theory.
yeah, so in theory, this whole program should provide some consistency for educators as well. Like knowing April 1st is when we'll receive increases or when we can increase when our fees will be increased. And so in
Yeah.
that aspect, it also this one made it very clear who qualified for the grant and who didn't. So knowing that they have control over the hourly school agers, extended care and overnight care families, those fees. So that's I guess a benefit is the clarity of that piece. Yeah. So I mean, I think, yeah.
Yeah, that's a hard, yeah. Again, right? Fighting very different battles than you are other people. You're not even really
Exactly.
speaking the same language, right?
Right.
It's
Yeah.
difficult.
And again,
And that continues to separate us instead of unify us.
I would rather have
Right.
our problem get the North.
Yeah.
But that being said, the South was frozen at a very low rate for the last couple of years. So it's been good to see that. Like we've been frozen
Right.
at a, I mean our day homes were making like an average of 650 per full-time enrollment. And so for the last couple of years, like that's been frozen there. And also for the agency, we've been frozen because we have no additional revenue either. And so, that limits us being able to offer new things or add new things to what we do offer.
And this is the first contract. This is an important point too. The first contract where educators and agencies have been two separate entities.
Right.
Going forward from the beginning, we would get funding and it would be given to the agency with no clarification on who it was meant for. So you had some agencies who were keeping money, some agencies who were giving it all away, and then a whole spectrum in between. And we,
Right.
as ASCA and as an agency, had said multiple times, like, we need to know who this money is for. You have to tell us. And they just
Yeah.
wouldn't. They just
We
wouldn't.
feel like it was done on purpose, like to make us have to be the bad guys, or so
Yeah.
they did that cost replacement funding, and it was 3% and then it was 6%. So for our agency, we split that between the educators and the agency because again, the agency, our rent goes up, we have costs that increase over years too. Some agencies were able to just give all that 6% straight to their educators, but they're not offering the same services we are either. So it's
Right.
one of those.
When we did the math, the 3% that the agency ended up retaining was basically equal to the cost of their insurance. So
Yeah,
keep 3%, keep paying your insurance, or
yeah.
we give it all to you and now you have to pay like it was the same. It
Yeah.
didn't make a difference. But that is an important thing to recognize is this is the first, and maybe that's part of the controversy, is the first time that the government is acknowledging that agencies need to be paid as well. And maybe
Yeah.
there's some agencies out there who feel entitled to it because they've been struggling through all these years to get through. I don't know.
Yeah, this is the first
Right.
time our licensing contract handles the agency funding and the grant contract handles the educator funding, though we're still responsible for doling that funding out.
Right. What are your thoughts on the money going directly to parents instead of agencies and daycare centers, allowing the parents to make the decision of what type of childcare they choose?
So I think that can create more paperwork or more work for me, which is okay. If it ends up being something that works well, that's fine. But I think in general, from my position of dealing with payments, parents are just not reliable. And I do appreciate getting all the funding from one place. I tell the government how much funding we need for the month, like to pay for the affordability grant to everybody. The government sends me that and it's done. And there's no trying to chase families. There's no dealing with somebody's vouchers have expired. So it would have to depend on how the system was laid out as well. And I want to be clear that I have a great deal of respect for unlicensed care and what the work that you guys do in the place that you play or the role that you play. But I think that becomes very difficult to allow taxpayer dollars to go to something that's not regulated. I think that the government runs into a problem with being accountability. Yeah, and it's the same thing. So when you have centers that are asking for that too, now that the taxpayers are paying the centers a lot of their money, do we think it's fair that somebody can go on a 3-month trip on the taxpayers' money,
But,
right? Like,
but wouldn't it be considered the same as when parents receive their monthly child tax benefit that they get from the government? The government has no say whether they use that on diapers or programs for the kids or
so
whatever. That it's
I,
just for the parents' decision, right?
that's technically, I believe, a rebate on the tax you've paid. So the parent has already spent that money and then they're getting some of it back. So it's not necessarily,
Okay.
in theory, it's not necessarily coming from all of us. Sometimes it
Right.
probably does, but in theory, that's a rebate on taxes money that they've already paid. And so I think
Okay.
I think the problem is that there's not another there's no other place to compare this to where you could be like, yeah, we can give money, tax dollars to unregulated field, to unregulated whatever it might be. And so I don't know how they would manage that or monitor that to ensure that that there isn't abuse happening places. Like right now, they can come in and they can come in and audit our whole agency, right? They can look at all of our books and see exactly where all of the dollars have gone. There would have to be some sort of reporting system for the unlicensed sector that would allow for reporting and auditing. And I don't know that they'll want to invest money in having more auditors or more people to do that part. So that's where I don't know how that would fit with the unlicensed sector to have parents have that option to still use those vouchers wherever they want. And I think it's just like us sitting here being like, we don't like that there's bad agencies, or it's the same for you guys. You guys don't like that there's unlicensed educators that would take advantage of the system.
Right.
Right. You don't like that either. You don't want that either. And so I think it's just trying to come up with a way that you could.
Yeah.
As people who are doing the right thing, it's easy to be like, that would be a quick fix.
Yeah.
But it's the ones who are not good who would cause the problem, right?
Right. And then they're going to cause that to fall apart for everybody. Or
Yeah.
So I think you'd have to really talk about or create with government partnership a system. Again, it's like the employee thing. You'd have to come up with the actual mechanics of how it would work, how it'd be monitored, how it'd be audited, and how they would we have, I saw in our new grant contract, I have to actually do funding reporting now every 6 months that shows where all the grant money is going. And I'm supposed to have that signed off by the senior financial officer or whatever. And then that's how they'll audit back to us. So I think if they could do the same thing, some sort of the same system, I just don't know that they'll want to invest in that they would invest in that. That's I guess my thoughts on that.
Yeah.
It's another tricky.
Yeah, fair enough.
Like you said, and I don't want to complain about that. Again, if that works, that works. But then the reporting that puts back on businesses again, when we are already from all of this drowning in paperwork, it's another step and another thing.
Right, because just becoming as we've transitioned away from being almost solely funded by the government, they talk a lot about red tape reduction, but our reporting burden has greatly increased in order to satisfy that piece of the government ensuring that this money is going where it belongs.
Yeah. See, I see it as more of the government is not necessarily funding the childcare spaces as much as they are funding the parent, right? The parents are the ones saying, we can't afford the childcare spots. We need the funding from the government. And so the parents should be then the ones responsible for saying, okay, this is where I'm taking my child. This is how many hours of care I'm using. It's more, are they the ones using what their funding is for directly?
Don't
Not
take my
looking
word for this. Did we have a system like that before? I thought we did. Like
I'm not
decades
100% sure.
We had a voucher system in Washington but it was not good, but it was different.
I've heard this before. So I guess I don't know enough about this to really speak a whole bunch on it. My interest would be seeing how it functions in other places and the downside of it. And maybe if we did have it, why we don't have it anymore.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you said they're not funding the spots, but funding the parent. Because here right away, we have to input every single child into the portal, and our funding we receive will be based on every single child that we put into the portal.
Right.
So that funding, but it's not funding the space because the educator has the space open, they're not receiving funding. Is that what you're saying?
Well, just as far as I get that agencies get their own funding for you guys to be able to operate and such, right? And then it's separate funding as far as per space. Is that correct?
Right. So yes, the affordability grant is different than agency funding.
Yes, agency. Agencies are funded by the home. We are not funded by the child. We are funded by the home.
Right. So all I'm saying is if the money went directly to the parent, it's funding the parent's need for childcare, it wouldn't be funding the providers or the agencies. It's not funding them. It's funding the parents' need
So
for the
This is where it
childcare.
comes from is the difference.
right. So
Yeah,
in
so
theory,
they
then
can
a
use,
parent could use it to stay home
I would
or
say they would
use it.
have to report that it was purely for childcare, not being a stay-at-home mom, right? Like,
So what about
because
like
that's
could
completely
they do it
different.
for a grandparent?
Yeah, I feel
Can,
they
can,
should be able to. Yeah, or
Yeah.
nannies, right? Nannies are not included in this, and it's not that they're not doing the work. It's
No,
and it's not that as a
Doing more
private
work.
provider,
yeah,
I don't want any government top-ups, any of that. I am more than happy to the funding be given directly to the parent and the parent choosing which type of childcare. And it's
Mhm.
nothing against any other form of childcare. I feel that the parent's right to choose which works for them has
Mhm.
been taken away, right? Like
and,
maybe the provider
In
closest to them is private versus they have to now drive 15 minutes out of their way to a different one,
yep.
right?
So I think your biggest hurdle will be how to create that type of system without it costing the government more money. I mean, that's their
Yeah,
bottom line, right? That's always they're going to be, or employees. They don't want to pay more people. That's why they have agencies, honestly. They don't want to hire a whole bunch of licensors. It costs them more to hire licensors, pay their benefits, pay their pensions, pay their wages, and pay to have those employees than it does to just fund us, right? So
yeah.
that's
Although it's funny because they seem to be, the research I've been doing, it seems that the government is more interested in bringing in new daycare centers and new like businesses that way than they are just using what they already have in front of them, right?
that's
They're offering grants to new daycare centers to open and like they're just giving
yeah,
money away basically
I
to
mean, listen,
any new
Joanne,
business will take money.
we applied for a space creation grant and we were denied because they said Medicine Hat has adequate coverage. And now in the last 6 months, they've opened 6 new daycares. So you tell me how that
Exactly.
works.
Yeah,
Like,
and that's my issue, right? That's my where I
yes,
think my biggest issue is coming from. It feels like this whole grant system or this whole flat fee system and the way they're bringing in all these new daycares and stuff, I feel it's not actually about funding parents' childcare. I feel there's a different, something different is going on here, whether it's
I have
the
a theory about
Alberta
that.
government based or the federal government versus provincial, whatever level it's at. This is not just about funding parents' childcare.
No, this is a result of having a liberal federal government and a conservative provincial government. We're a pawn. Our provincial government wants to be able to turn around and say, "See, this didn't work. The liberals failed," and that is going to come on the backs of all of us, right?
Yeah,
the shift to jet created a lot of issues regarding these. They don't understand how childcare works. They don't. They
exactly.
fundamentally do not understand how it works. And so they make all these decisions that just
Yeah,
don't come out or play out the way that they want them to.
And then they act shocked that it didn't work,
yeah,
even though we told them it's not going to work.
Yeah, well,
yeah,
but to be fair, I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't know that any of them would be that much better right now because I'm a foster parent as well. And so one of the things is I'm contracted with the government and they're bringing Medicine Hat was one of the last areas that didn't have agencies for foster care. They're bringing agencies in because they want to reduce their staff members, their federal
yeah,
employee or their provincial employee numbers, and they want to contract out to a different company that can do it for cheaper, right? And so
right.
it is interesting how much more it feels like money is at the heart of
Yeah,
all of this and taking away from parent choice and
yeah,
from quality, high quality care. We do sometimes run into problems where we need to help educate parents about what high quality childcare looks like too.
yeah,
Because there's some parents if they don't know what they don't know.
right.
We've obviously gone into license homes that we have not been able to license, and sometimes for very serious reasons. And we know
Yeah,
that they are operating unlicensed now for years. And they
right.
were they were and at the time we could report that to licensing and they didn't care. Like they
Yeah,
they didn't care that we saw drug paraphernalia on the countertops while
right.
kids were there. They didn't care.
Yeah,
And so I think that that's again, I do not want to ever come across them disparaging to the private sector at all, because I think that we know that in Medicine Hat, there are some great ladies we'd love to snag and pull onto our team that are doing wonderful work, right?
Yeah,
But there is the problem of when it's not monitored. And we know that there's monitored homes that are struggling too. But in a good agency, the monitored homes are getting, if they're struggling, it's getting found and
yeah,
rectified. We've been into homes here in the Hat that are nobody's child should go there, but because my friend's aunt took her kid, I'm gonna take my kid too because I hear she's great. And we're like, we
yeah,
can't say anything, obviously, right? So it's helping to see how we can educate parents to be able to make good high quality choices when they're looking at unlicensed and licensed, and how the unlicensed field itself can maybe help regulate itself
yeah,
in providing whether it be reports to whoever or whatever it might be, or maybe it's giving, maybe there's a middle zone where agencies can have, I don't even know, a different relationship with unlicensed homes. That want to
yeah.
remain unlicensed but want to be able to take advantage of the grant program, maybe there's, or the funding, maybe there's some sort of other type of relationship that can be created there. I don't know.
I mean, I think in every meeting or everything I've ever heard, it's that relation that you were saying to taxpayer money
Yeah,
to government money, government monitored. So
Yeah.
that is probably the main
that's the
behavior
yeah,
that I
that's what
assume.
yeah.
That's what I've always been told, but I mean,
That's what
take that
comes
with a
out
Right.
grain
of
of
me.
salt. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think with this forecasting to cost Alberta $720 million annually, how sustainable do you think this program is?
Uh,
Do
um,
I think or do I hope?
fingers crossed it all just works out. I Well, obviously, I think they could have done things a lot better from the get-go and would have saved a lot of money. Like not had
Right.
people paying $0 and $37 for childcare. Like
Yeah.
you could have saved a ton of money by doing this in a more effective way the first couple of years. And the part that gets me is they knew. We told them like
Yeah.
they knew they had to create a whole separate system for
Overpayment.
people who had $0, who, yeah, for people who were getting more grant money than they were charging their parents. So they knew that they were overpaying by a whole
Yeah.
ton. So sorry, that's off topic. I don't know. I hope so, but I don't
Not with
know.
the way, not with the way the whole entire world is
No,
going.
I
Yeah.
think honestly, I think a smarter, I mean, it probably would be better to keep these fees, to not drop them down again next year to 200 and then
Yeah.
just be raising them again year after year to keep up with the cost of inflation. Like, why are we doing that? Like, parents are going to adjust to this. They're going to have, I mean, they're going to have to. The economy's going to have to adjust to it. Everybody's going to have to adjust to it. So just stop. They don't need to drop it. That would save us some money right there.
Three twenty
Yeah.
six 25
Is a
a
fair,
reasonable
yes,
cost for
yes,
childcare. I don't
Yeah.
know why we need to drop it again.
yeah.
And just to
Well,
turn
I have,
around then and probably take it away the next year. Like,
yeah, I have my suspicions that, I mean, the whole grant subsidy initially when it came out in 2021 was kind of a ploy for getting votes. I feel like they knew there was a problem in the system, and the best way to do it, which benefited them and their agenda, was to make it sound amazing to the parents who are the voters, right? Instead of thinking, how are we actually going to help the people that truly need it? Because like with the old program, as long as you made as long as you made no more than 180,000 a year, you got grants and subsidies. Now, when my children were little, years and years and years ago, that cap was 36,000 a year. And if you made more than that, you got nothing. And they jumped from that to now everybody gets something, right? Which I understand childcare costs are high, but so is mortgages. So is, buying a new car. So is your 3 trips to Mexico that, there had to have been a better way to do this. So I think a lot of it came down to what sounds great, looks great, makes me look great. And now we're coming to this fallout where we realize we've spent all this money that the government did not have on giving childcare a lower cost of childcare for everybody, regardless of their financial needs. And then I think this new program came out as like a counterbalance for that. And I have my suspicions when it expires in a year, it's going to be a whole new different something because we'll have a
Yeah.
whole new government in place and it'll
The
be
letter,
surprise, here our new system, right?
Yeah.
the letter from Minister Jones was telling of that.
Yeah,
Was that they hinted to that
yeah,
yeah, we'll do this one more year, but
It's not sustainable.
yeah, it's not sustainable as
No.
is. So that's going to obviously create a lot of disruption in the field.
Mhm.
They sold
Yeah,
this as universal, meaning that every child, regardless of income, would have access to the same high quality programs. And that is like you said, it sounds good, but it forgets the most vulnerable.
right.
And that the and some of our most vulnerable, our poorest folks have some of the most vulnerable children
Yeah,
who could use the most access to high quality care and services that are provided through those care, like speech and things like that. And
exactly.
this program leaves them, it leaves them behind. But again, nobody
Yeah,
told us subsidy was leaving.
right.
This is like a kind of horror story because I like to share those. I was talking to another agency in Central recently, and they have a family who the child had been apprehended by Children's Services
Mhm.
and then was placed back in the home. But one of the conditions was that this child needed to be in childcare. This mother obviously is one of the lowest income families, and she's not going to be able to afford the flat rate. So her
Right.
consequence is that she potentially loses her child because of this increase. And I can't, like, I got goosebumps then and I got goosebumps just now even saying
Yeah,
it. Like it's just horrific. Some of the effects that our lowest, most vulnerable people are facing because of this.
yeah. So what do we all do as a childcare community, not private versus agency, not day home versus daycare? What do we that do this job because we love the kids? How do we help them?
I think one of the biggest impacts that we can have, the last meeting I was on earlier this week, she mentioned how many, like, tens of thousands of letters she had gotten, specifically from families. I think they've heard from agencies and businesses and educators over the past years enough. I think they need to hear from families,
Right,
specifically how this is impacting them. So supporting our families to advocate for themselves, I think is something that we haven't tried yet. That we
Yeah,
want to try.
we do, yeah, push a little bit of that. I think too, specifically, maybe for the unlicensed sector, is pushing to have access to the town hall calls and the other
yeah,
calls with the ministers' offices, because I think that that would help you have the same information that everybody else has,
right,
so that you can better speak to the needs of your part of the sector.
right.
So I mean, I think because I was just sitting here thinking to myself, when we're talking about if you're talking about parent vouchers,
Mhm.
your perspective on them is going to be significantly different than ours.
Right,
And so, but you don't necessarily can't ask those questions in the town hall. Or like
right.
Heather can say to you, what I hear from the government is that it's because of the tax, but you should be able to hear that. You should be able to ask that question and hear it. I do know
Yeah,
the organization that I'm not real good friends with. They're big supporters of parent vouchers. It just depends on how the system is done.
right.
But they are sometimes on there asking about that, but they've stopped because I don't know, we had a call with Danielle Smith who came on to the town hall and they asked about it and she was like no. And
Yeah,
then there was a call with Matt Jones where it was asked about no, with Danielle Smith again, where it was asked about, and she was like, well, I had a niece that went to an unlicensed home and it was great. So maybe we can figure out something. So I don't know what the stance is there
yeah,
now. And I do know that when they asked Minister Jones, he also was like, no, but he tends to just sort of answer. Like he doesn't always,
yeah,
there's been a lot of times we've had to go back after town halls and be like, so here's what he said. Can you clarify that? Because that is not what the standards say, or that is not what, whatever else says.
right.
But if you were able to be a part of those calls, or
Yeah,
invited to those calls so that you could ask those very specific questions of them and hear their replies, that might help you formulate how you would approach advocating for your sector.
But you're very much
Right.
right in that we are looking at a time of political change,
Yes,
essentially,
yes, yes.
which it makes
Yeah.
you, what are you going to have to start from scratch with the next one who comes in, right? Like it just when we start to get answers, something like that will change, and then you get a minister who is just like, no,
And I would,
right?
and I
Yeah.
mean, and it's also frustrating because both of what somebody's concerns or interests might be can be, I would think the Liberal government and the NDP, well, the NDP in Alberta have been extremely vocal on their support of licensed care. So
Yeah.
in that aspect, you would have a harder road, right? That would
Right.
probably be easier with the current one, but also the current government is going to make it harder for this funding to continue. So it's
Yeah.
you're battling both
Yeah.
ways, right? Like regardless of the government that comes into place, it's going to create roadblocks for all
Yeah.
sorts of our sectors and sectors, right? Because I always consider
Yeah.
the day home sector its own sector, and then unlicensed day homes are part of that sector, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just as like licenses are a part and agencies are a part, like we're not the sector. The sector
Right.
is all the
Yeah, yeah. I think whichever government gets in on the next election, there's a lot of work to be done. I think
Mhm.
between governments understanding exactly what all the levels and different types of childcare is, and understanding that, not every parent needs the same amount. Like that's not how we help our most vulnerable, right? By giving the same to everybody. That's not how equality really works, right? Some
Oh,
people
that's
need more
no,
help, some
that's the
people
difference
need
between
less
being
work.
equal and being equitable, right? And that's the
Exactly.
part they missed with this.
Yeah, yeah. So I hopefully, I guess fingers crossed at some point, there's a way to make the ones that actually need the help be the ones that get the help. Because at the end of the day, it's the same people that suffer, and that's the kids.
Yeah. And I just had a thought too on when we were talking about the spaces and how many new spaces there are opening up. I do think we are going to see a bit of a collapse where there's going to be centers and preschools closing because
Yeah,
they cannot stay full. And I'm a little bit of a fan of the free market in that aspect because it's probably going to be the lower quality places that are not
yeah,
able to keep themselves full. That might help right the ship a little bit to not have a whole bunch of places competing for funding, to not have so many centers operating and barely getting by, or that might help
yeah,
right it a bit, but that's going to be a
yeah,
longer term picture, right? So there's going to be an adjustment here where some people are going to pull out of childcare right as a lot of childcares are opening, and
yeah.
then either people are going to go back to work, or those sectors aren't going to survive.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the government's not helping private day homes or agency day homes as far as allowing more daycare centers to come in. You're taking business opportunities away from the providers,
Which
right? And putting
which kind of blows my mind because it's cheaper for them to fund us. Like if
exactly.
you're looking at
Yeah,
like just the financials of it, it's cheaper for them
yeah,
to fund us. And we have this discussion a lot about, the truth of the matter is a day home's overhead is usually less than what
yeah,
a center's looking at. We understand they serve more kids or whatever, they need more space and whatnot. But because typically a lot of your cost in your day home is a shared cost with your home life too. When you're paying your
right.
power bill, you're paying for some of your power too. When you're paying
Exactly. Yeah,
so it's a shared thing. So it amazes us too that they left us frozen for so long while they just kept letting more center spaces become open. And
yeah,
we know in Medicine Hat they're struggling to find quality staff because there's just not enough
yeah,
people that work in childcare, right? And so you're opening these spaces up. You don't have quality staff.
exactly.
It's a recipe for disaster, really.
Yeah, 100%. Do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to add?
There was one piece of funding I just forgot to mention. I don't know if this will fit in anywhere. When you're talking, they did include in our funding too now the $1,000 for bringing on new day homes, which is something new educators. Sorry, so we're operating a private day home all your life, and then you came over to an agency. The agency would receive $1,000. So this is another great example of where they give the agency the money. And while we might do what's right with it. I don't
Yeah,
know what that looks like, but that's another funding thing that was added, which I think was with the right intention to
yeah,
um, to help bring more more day homes into the grant of eligibility to be
Right.
able to be eligible for those grant spaces. So I think, but that's pretty much all that they really did for day.
Yeah, and then I think as far as final thoughts, I guess my hope would just be, like you said, there is a whole lot of conflict between educators and agencies
Mhm.
going on right now. And I would just hope that we can take that as a sign that we need more transparency and that we need more communication. And I think that
Right.
if we had those things, we would find some commonalities that might make it easier for us to advocate for all of us on the whole, instead
Yeah,
of fighting each other all the time.
And some of that can
exactly.
be so simple. Like pre-COVID, we haven't really gotten back into the swing of things. We hosted a lot of in-person trainings, and our in-person trainings were open to our educators, educators from any other agency, and any unlicensed educator in Medicine Hat that wanted to attend. I think having those type of spaces, even though it's a training, but spaces to come together and to see
Hmm.
what's happening with each part of our sector,
Right.
and being able to answer those questions, even really small questions that will get. I have an unlicensed educator that will message me when she's having problems with a parent and isn't sure how to handle it just because she doesn't have anybody to ask that to. She doesn't know who can I have read this text before I fire it off, or who can I or
Yeah.
whatnot, right? She doesn't have that community where if we at least bring them, and we have a few like of our licensed homes that they have really good friends that are unlicensed that they get together at the park or whatever, but like being able to bring that into one community so that the voice is heard from all, I think
Right.
is a good step in the right direction too.
Absolutely.
And I think it's hard. I do think that there's a lot of unlicensed homes that have been badly burned by agencies as well. So
Yeah.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
Absolutely. Well, we'd
here,
like
here's
to,
it will never go with an agency again because of a bad experience that they had. And I get it. Sure, I get it. No, but I get it. I mean, I understand why there's, or
Livelihood, you don't want to mess with that again if you've had a bad
yeah,
experience.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, agencies have to be a
yeah,
lot more transparent. Yeah.
Yeah, transparency is huge, 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 right? And
And
making sure your educators know what you are doing. When you said that, educators need to be aware of what you're doing to support them, because lots of times you and I just go about our day and we have 5 conversations with 5 different
yeah, that's true.
and they think, well, not they, but like educators might think their agency isn't doing anything.
That they are.
We just aren't getting any results.
Yeah, nobody's answering us still, even though we're still working at it. And I think too that the agencies need to stop using licensing as a cop out. And if you have a policy, own it. Don't
yeah,
don't blame it on like we haven't. There was an agency that told their day home educator that it's against licensing to let kids chew gum. That's not against licensing. Sure, that can be your agency policy.
Probably a
But
dumb
like,
move to
yeah,
give a bunch of food.
yeah, I mean, you don't want to give them all gum, but just the point of it is that
right.
it just creates that disinformation, and then when your educator finds out that that's not a licensing thing, then now you are the distrusted agency. Like we just, if you have a
Yeah,
policy as an agency, own that policy. If your policy is
yeah,
that nope, nobody's allowed to charge any increased fees, own it then. Explain to your educators why you've chosen that policy, what you're
yeah,
trying to accomplish, and what you want to do with it, and then leave room for feedback from your educators, and then make the decision you're going to make, but own it. Don't blame it on licensing.
exactly.
Don't blame it on the grant. Don't blame it on the government. Own it.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'd like to thank you guys for joining us today. It's been very eye-opening and educational. There's been a lot that I've learned. So thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having us. I mean, we're passionate about being a good agency and innovating, so we're always happy to make connections. And I think if there's anything you come across in your travels with your podcast, feel free to reach out, and we're happy to continue that
If
discussion.
you are going to pursue looking more at what that voucher system looks like, I'm happy to provide information to you on what we do as agency to satisfy the government's
Reporting.
reporting requirements, and then to look at how you can incorporate that in
Oh, awesome.
to a
Thank you.
voucher
Yeah.
system like that. So don't ever hesitate. People get really really like, well, I don't know if I'm allowed to share that. If they sent it to me, I'll share it with anybody. As long as
Yeah.
it doesn't say don't tell, I'm telling. So
Right.
so definitely like if you need information as far as like figuring out how you can structure a system like that and provide the reporting that would satisfy the government, I'm more than happy to help share that
Thank
information
you.
with you.
Yeah, no,
So
I definitely appreciate that. Yeah, it's it's hard sometimes as private providers to get any guidance from an agency, even just asking what are, hey, what are the benefits of being with an agency? They're not always wanting to be open and
Just
forthcoming with
wild.
It
information.
is wild. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, a chance to show the type, right? Like, I don't get that. And it comes back to what you said, Joanne, about at the end of the day, the kids who suffer from that, or the people who suffer from that, are the kids, right? Because
Exactly.
we can support us all. At the end of the day, there's going to be families who only want licensed for their reasons, and there's going to be
Yeah.
families who will choose unlicensed and private homes because for their reasons, right? Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to always be this big competition thing.
No, but I will say
Exactly.
at the end of the day, for me, agencies' practices and behavior should never be the barrier for an unlicensed educator coming on board. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
We should never be the reason that you don't, and I know we are. I mean, we in the bigger context, but the
Yeah.
agency should never be the reason why a licensed educator or an unlicensed educator is like, nope, not going licensed because of whatever. That should
Yeah.
never be the case. We should be so supportive, so transparent, so easy to work with.
Yeah.
So,
If you have other reasons, cool, but it
yes, but it shouldn't be, yeah, it shouldn't be our practices or policies that drive you away. We should be the ones
Right.
that are wanting to encompass you into our group.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Well, thank you so much, and hopefully we'll get to connect again.
Awesome.
Yeah,
All right,
awesome.
thank you.
Have a good Sunday.
Thanks, you too.
Bye, ladies.
Bye.
Bye. And that's it for Day Home Divas this week.
Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Day Home Divas, on TikTok at dayhome.divas, and join our Facebook group, Day Home Divas.
Hope you join us again next week.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.